It's an election day version of the Fenway Rundown podcast. Red Sox probably not top of mind for you today, but there is news to get to. I'm Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam from his home studios, as well as the offseason begins in earnest. This week, there are some things that are happening. We'll get to the news from yesterday. We'll get to what's going to happen in the next couple weeks, and we will have updates mostly from someone who's not on this show today. Chris Smith is in San Antonio. He is not remembering the Alamo, but he is keeping you up to date with everything going on. Craig Breslow with his daily availabilities, all the developments from Texas where the GM meetings are underway. The best way, Sean, is probably the site and the Fenway Rundown podcast to get those updates. But of course, there is also the Fenway Rundown Insider Text program.
There is indeed, which you can join by texting the word join to 617-751-6257. Then click the link to subscribe. That will get you a free 14-day trial period, after which you'll be charged $4.99 monthly.
So the offseason's underway. The World Series is behind us. We finished last week with a mailbag episode where we talked about the Dodgers winning, some offseason preview stuff. We started our coverage yesterday on the site with Red Sox bold predictions, which we've now done the last two off seasons. My prediction, Sean's, Chris Smith. We'll get to those. And yesterday, real, tangible Red Sox news. Actually, there's been kind of a drip of it with Wilyer Abreu winning a Gold Glove, some Silver Slugger finalists, things like that. But really, the big news yesterday, and the thing we want to get to first, is a development I would describe as shocking, not capital S shocking, but definitely in our world was. Nick Pivetta gets the qualifying offer from the Red Sox. So just to put it in perspective, I was because Chris was preparing for the Craig Breslow scrum and kind of on the move in San Antonio. I was kind of pre-writing the decisions that would come down at 5 o'clock, and I wrote the drafts of two versions. Number one, the Red Sox do not give anybody qualifying offers. Number two, the Red Sox give Tyler O'Neill, but not Nick Pivetta, a qualifying offer. And then at about 4:55 p.m., I get a text from somebody with the list of guys who were qualified, and the words Nick Pivetta showed up. And that
It's
started
door number 3.
it was door number three, one that we didn't anticipate. And that started what we call in the trade a rewrite special. If you want to imagine that Kermit on the typewriter meme, that was what was going on here. So that was interesting just because it wasn't, as the kids say, on the bingo card at all. Sean called me immediately in shock almost about what happened and why they had done it, which the whole exercise is really I think, an indictment that we need to get out of the house more if this is a shocking, exciting moment in our lives. But and in the job and what we do, it was not expected. So, Sean McAdam, take it away with your reactions. You wrote a column last night about it, but just your thoughts, almost a day later on this whole kind of surprising development.
Yeah, I was completely surprised, Chris. I did not see that coming at all. I thought if there was a small chance of offering a qualifying offer, it was going to go to Tyler O'Neill. I think you could better make the case that that is a better allocation of 21.
And you did last week because you said they should do it.
Yeah. It would have been an overpay for O'Neill, certainly. He won't get anywhere near that on the open market. But I think it's also an overpay for Pivetta. And on the face of it, it's clear that they see this as a deepening of the rotation. They now have a 5-man rotation of mostly established major league pitchers.
If he accepts it.
If he accepts it, correct. We're going by that, and he may not. And maybe, excuse me, maybe that is part of the Red Sox strategy. Maybe they are already hearing, and as I noted in the column, 6 of the 13 players who were given qualifying offers yesterday were starting pitchers, including a few on the New York Mets. I would not have said Nick Martinez was going to get a $21 million qualifying offer, nor would I have said Luis Severino or Sean Manaea or Nick Pivetta. But the demand for pitching is such that either teams want to retain what they have, even if they're overpaying a little bit, or they view the pitching market as so robust that most of these guys will politely turn down the qualifying offer, and while having compensation attached to them go back out of the market and get a multi-year deal. And maybe that's what happens with Nick Pivetta. I don't see a multi-year offer coming from the Red Sox. I know they like, and other teams like, the underlying analytics here. If you look at the secondary and tertiary uh, measurements with quality of stuff and under the hood and all that kind of stuff, the feeling is that Pavetta has yet to reach his full potential, and there's more there. But I'm looking at a guy who's never had an ERA under 4, who's never won more than 10 games, however much we devalue wins as a meaningful stat. This is a guy who's made 28 or more starts in 3 of the last 4 years, hasn't been able to top 10 wins, usually an ERA in the low 4s. There's value to that as a guy who's been mostly durable, though he missed some time twice this past season. I just don't see him as being a $21 million guy. And as I said, it's possible the Red Sox don't either and are convinced that he's going to say no and sign elsewhere for a 3 or 4 year deal that will reward him and give him some stability as he gets into his early 30s. But I did not see this one coming.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with just the player and the pitcher, Nick Pivetta, and what he is at any value. Um, to me, the 4.14 ERA, it always kind of lands in that range. But it's the volatility that I think is something that, as an organization, they should be kind of ready to move on from. We see the no-hit stuff, the crazy strikeout numbers, usually against some bad teams, and then some blow-up starts where you're out of the game in the second or third inning. It's not a consistent, 420 throughout the year. It's a lot of ebbs and flows.
Yeah, this is, if he were a guy that would, that threw 6 innings and gave up 3 runs every
Right.
time, and that's a 4.5 ERA, then you'd say, like, okay, not dominant, but worthwhile and an important part to the staff. But as you point out, he gets there in a difficult way by going 7 innings and giving up 2, and then
No,
his next
it's
start.
like flirting with a no-hitter and then the next one out in the third inning. Like
Right.
we've gone over the numbers of pitching deep, early hooks, that's the type of stuff. And I understand the value of he has all the ingredients and the projections and all that type of stuff, but the Red Sox have also had, 4.5 years to get him to the next level under different regimes, different pitching coaches, different analytic structures, all that. They haven't been able to do it. And
Right.
so,
He's if they were making this determination at 26 that, well, he's had 3 years and we see another level for, but this guy's 31 and he has been in the big leagues for 6 full seasons, otherwise he wouldn't be qualifying for free agency. He's 31. I think we're pretty comfortable saying he is what he is. And to be clear, that is a guy with some value if you identify the need for a 4th or 5th starter or even a swingman who can contribute out of the bullpen, as he did by necessity in 2023. But to expect that this guy is always all of a sudden going to blossom into a number 2 starter and, give you 3-5 and 16 wins and 200 innings and 200 strikeouts, I don't see it.
my point generally is that the mediocrity he kind of represents, like a good player on a mediocre team, and I think that the Red Sox should be aiming for more, and they should be aiming higher. Whether that be, I had Crochet and Flaherty in my bold predictions, whether that be Burns, Fried, Snell, whatever it is. And this is just a little bit more of the same. I think there's other takeaways too in terms of taking the qualifying offer. The Red Sox, as Craig Breslow told you, have to be comfortable with the idea of him taking it if they make the offer. And if you look at it, Nick Pivetta made $7.5 million last year. He will now be due, if he accepts this, a 3 times raise. He's not 35. He's going to be 32 next year. Maybe he bets on himself on the 1 year deal. And it really comes down to, and I think his market's going to just by definition move quickly here because teams are going to have to make offers if they want to be aggressive on him. Kylie McDaniel at ESPN put out 3 for 63, which is that, 21 times 3. If he gets that from a team, I'm sure he'll walk and he won't take the
Why
qualifying
would you
offer.
take that for 1 year if you can get it for 3?
And in that case, you have to give Craig Breslow his flowers for reading the market, well, and reading it to a point where he gets a draft pick for Nick Pivetta walking, which, we all assumed he was going to be, leaving for nothing. So if that's the case, that's great. I do think that, There are probably people with the Red Sox that hope he declines, but it's definitely in play that he accepts. And, the analysis of that will come after the 19th when we get the decision. But if he does accept, and I think, you and I would probably put that at what, 65-35 that he does or 70-30 that he does right now. It's a very, very, very weird way to start your offseason. And as you pointed out yesterday, the specter of having $40 million committed to Giolito and Pivetta to start your offseason is bizarre to say the least.
Yeah, and we should put the preemptive uh claim out here that we don't know how much this team intends to spend.
Yep.
It may be,
Well, we'll get to
maybe.
that.
I would say it's unlikely, but maybe there is a directive from ownership and upper management that says, "Look, if you think we should be, then we're okay going over the first CBT level. It's been a while. We need to invest in this team. It's time for us to compete." If they're backing all their talk up with actual, uh, with action to reflect that, then I wouldn't be as worried. If they are intent on staying under the high 230s, then committing $40 million, I think the worry is, as I wrote, is that a lot of Red Sox fans think, oh, that's their pitching. That's their rotation. They've now, if Pivetta accepts, they've got five major league starters to go with guys like Criswell and Fitz for depth pieces.
And Priester.
And this is it. They're not going to be in on Burns and Fried and Snell. They're not going to be trading for Crochet or others. They've done their pitching because they still need a righty bat. They still need bullpen help, and they still need a backup catcher. And there's only so much money to be spent. So it's hard to judge this move in a vacuum. And we're doing that on two stages. A, we don't know if that is going to accept. And B, we don't know what the marching orders are in terms of budget and payroll. If they really are going to be aggressive, and this is only the start of what they're doing this offseason, maybe you can understand it. If this is it, and they are now spent when it comes to starting pitching, then I think most fans are rightly going to be very disappointed.
Well, I think that there is, devil's advocate, Mr. Positivity here. There is a way and to look at this and think it's a sign of the aggressiveness. Maybe as an organization, they were willing to say, well, we're going to go up significantly on payroll, which of course they haven't told us yet. They should. Other teams are doing it. It's still not a competitive disadvantage, Sam. We're going to go way up on payroll. If he accepts, fine. That doesn't change it. We're going to still try to go out and get more pitching. If he doesn't, we get the draft pick. That's fine. It doesn't, that's kind of, the theory or the strategy behind your O'Neill take from last week, where you were talking about, if you want to go all in, this is kind of a show that you be aggressive, take him back for 21, you overpay, but you're fine with that. Same kind of thing applies. And I do think, as people have mentioned, does this open up the possibility for a trade elsewhere in the rotation? I had yesterday as one of my boldest predictions that the Crochet package going out includes Willie Abreu, the Gold Glover, and Cutter Crawford, and a prospect not in the Big Four. To me, that's a little bit more palatable than moving the Big Four, just because you have kind of coverage in those spots. Crochet, an upgrade over Crawford. You have the outfielders, that type of stuff. That, to me, the Pivetta, if he comes back, makes Crawford a pretty good trade candidate. But at the same time, you look at Crawford, you look at Houck, you look at Bayo, and you're like, you've been trying to get these guys for 15 years to develop through your system and be at least middling major league starters. Why would you give up on any, especially when there's, nobody coming in the pipeline, all position players? So it's a confusing start, but there is a chance that it signals aggressiveness to come. Maybe they lock Pivetta in for 21 and say, we're still going to go out and get a starter. And they enter the year with the five guys you mentioned, Bayo, Pivetta, Crawford, Houck, Giolito, and Whitlock. People forget about probably in the bullpen, Fitz, Priester, and then they go get an ace on top of that. And they go with, we all know that you're not going to just need the five by the time the season comes. We saw that in spring training with Giolito and Whitlock going down. So if it's an uber aggressive strategy with this as the first step, great. That's what fans want. That's what we've been pushing them to do. I think there's a seed of doubt based on how they've operated the last few years. And because you have to look at, we know this piece of the puzzle, we don't know the rest. But it's an interesting, kind of thought exercise anyway.
Yeah, we need the We need the second part of this to get a sense of what the thought process is. Whether they're hoping but prepared for him to hoping that he doesn't accept, but prepared to accept the consequences if he does, and are not going to be dissuaded from going out to adding a frontline starter to join this and make it a really deep rotation. But as I said, if they are operating within certain limits and this is the only thing they're doing with starting pitching, bringing Giolito and Pivetta back, then it's not nearly enough.
And the other thing to mention here, and this is real, and we've seen this since the qualifying offer was introduced more than 10 years ago, there are some guys where their markets are absolutely cratered by having a draft pick attached. I mean, back 10, 15 years ago, you saw, and even, some guys who in the last couple of years, not to this extent, but would have to sign after the draft because teams did not find it,
Right. Which is harder to do
worthwhile.
now that the draft is in
Right.
mid-July rather than early June.
So not saying that's going to happen with Pavetta, but now it's for a team to get him, it's let's say that 3 year, $60-ish million commitment plus you're giving up a high draft pick for a mid rotation starter. Same could be said with Manaea, with Severino, with Nick Martinez, with some of these guys, and that can possibly crater your market. It's not going to affect the Juan Sotos of the world or Corbin Burns or Max Fried, but it does affect these guys on the margins.
Yep.
And we've seen, the Red Sox have, I think, other than Story, not been willing to sign a qualifying offer free agent the last few years. Teoscar Hernandez, a guy who is available, he got one. He will most likely decline it and hit the free agent market. So now the Red Sox would have to give up a pick for him. At this point, that's one of those things like, all right, the farm system's fine. Give up the pick. Go get the player. To me, but that's a conversation for later down the line.
Right. And it may well be that they are sufficiently convinced that Pavetta's market will be robust enough that there was no way he's going to accept. And they saw this as an opportunity to replenish a draft pick that they may be prepared to give up to sign Max
Yeah.
Fried or to sign Teoscar Hernandez.
Yeah, this could be one of the most shrewd moves in Red Sox history, but as of November
Or it
5th,
could blow up in their face.
and I think that was the visceral reaction to it on Monday. But we know and we've reported that there are teams that absolutely love Nick Pivetta. We saw Kylie McDaniel write today that teams look at him as the next Zach Eflin, a guy that teams think we get him in our lab, we can turn him into a frontline guy. The Rays are a team that have loved him forever. Bloom said that even when the Red Sox acquired him, the Rays had wanted him for a long time. We know the Astros went hard at him at the trade deadline and would probably like to add him now. I'm sure there's other teams in that boat. If one of those teams gets silly and offers, again, 3 for 63, 3 for 65, is willing to give up the pick, the Red Sox are going to look brilliant here. We'll find out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I just don't see that team being Tampa Bay. I mean, if the market is indeed 3 times 20 or even close to that, are they really going to make him the highest paid free agent that they've ever signed? I think Eflin was
3 for 40.
set that record
Yeah.
a few years ago. Every once in a while they step out into the middle of the marketplace, but over 20 million or in the neighborhood of 20 million is toward the high end. This is a team that, yes, has a ballpark down the road, but whose short-term revenue is going to be compromised by their stadium. And even if 6 weeks ago they had planned to be more aggressive and earmark one big expenditure in the free agent market, it's probably harder to rationalize that after their ballpark roof was blown off and they faced the prospect of playing the first half of the season in a 10,000 seat spring training facility.
One more point on this, Nick Martinez was a guy who could fit the Red Sox, Manaea, Severino. It's tough to see them giving up a pick for those guys if they decline, which even would make the Pivetta reunion even more likely to me. So there's a lot of angles to this. Again, November 19th is the deadline at which he needs to accept. Free agency is open. The Red Sox have their contingent in San Antonio, as we do with Chris Smith. Sean, I listened to the entire audio of Craig Breslow last night. It was 30 minutes of qualifiers and not much in the way of hard news. Talked about Pivetta and that they ultimately landed on this decision. Wouldn't really give much. I'm not sure if you've, read any of the other 14 stories Smith wrote for the site or some of the other coverage from down there or listen to the audio. But do you have any other takeaways from Breslow's kind of meet and greet last night?
Yeah, he did talk about the catching situation and made it seem pretty clear that they don't envision Kyle Teal breaking with the team out of
Hmm.
spring training. I suppose that's not terribly surprising, though some people thought, well, if he's going to be your catcher of the future and you need a backup, why not have him ease into the lineup by being at the start of the year Connor Wong's backup? It does not seem as if they are treating that as an option.
Yep.
There's a ton of catchers out there, many of them of the good field, no hit, Austin Hedges type as a guy I talked about bringing in, who is a good framer, a good pitch blocker, a guy who's been on winning teams in Texas and Cleveland, who's seen as a positive clubhouse influence, not going to cost a lot of money. You could get him for a few $1 million on a 1 year deal or a one with an option. And then if Kyle Teal, through his development at AAA, is ready for, say, June 1st or July 1st, then you move on from Hedges or trade him or do something and make room for Teal. But it's pretty obvious that they don't see Teal as part of the opening day equation.
I in my bold predictions wrote the Red Sox free agent most likely to re-sign is Danny Jansen. Part of that process of elimination, Kenley put it a 0% chance. Pivetta, as of yesterday, I kind of would have too. I have them signing Teoscar as part of that, so no O'Neill. But I had Danny Jansen. And then I went on MLB Trade Rumors, which does a really good job with their free agent projections and their top 50. Did you see the projection for Danny Jansen?
I did not.
2 for 20.
Uh, well, then I don't like his chances of
No,
returning to the
that
Red
is,
Sox.
I was like, is this the same? I
Yeah, a
thought
guy a guy who
maybe
finished
they're talking about Kenley.
with an OPS
Seriously, it
of
was horrible. Like just a horrible, horrible, horrible overpay if you do that.
yeah, I don't see that as being I don't think it's accurate, and if it is, I don't see the Red Sox playing in that end of the pool. Why would you invest that much in a guy that is clearly a short-term fix?
Right.
You have your catcher of the future at AAA, who's probably no more than a half season away from making his major league debut. You have Connor Wong, who's a passable catcher in the interim, and all the things they expected out of Danny Jansen did not come through
Hmm.
in 2 months. Now, maybe that's a relatively small sample size for a guy who was playing twice a week, but they envisioned him. I thought he played well defensively and was superior to Wong as a receiver and as a pitch blocker and framer and all those things. But this was all about, oh, he's a righty bat who's made for Fenway with pull power to the right side, and you're going to see the kind of production that he hasn't been able to put up in other ballparks, and it didn't happen. Now, again, he probably ended up with fewer than 100 at bats with the Red Sox over a couple of months.
It's like three
Um,
homers, right?
yeah, yeah, and I think like 6 extra base hits in 2 months. He was a huge bust offensively, not as a guy or as a catcher, but offensively. And even if you're looking even if you're earmarking that for an Austin Hedges type, a good, as I said, good field, no hit guy that sort of describes Hedges to a T. It just doesn't make sense to commit that kind of money to a guy who is not going to be your number one catcher. There are a million of those guys out there.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the others out there, like they don't need to give a multi-year deal, and they don't need to give even like really a guaranteed major league deal. If you think about it, they just kind of need to sign a guy to a minor league deal, have him come into camp. Elias Diaz is out there, Higashioka, Carson Kelly, Gary
I think
Sanchez, who
Higashioka is going to make some money and
yeah,
should, as a guy
Jacob,
kind of in his prime who's gotten a little better offensively and was always pretty good defensively. That's another level, and so is Travis d'Arnaud, who
right?
was
He just got
whose option was not picked up by Atlanta. That was a bit of a surprise on the part of the Braves. But again, they don't need that caliber
right.
guy. They need a catch and throw guy
I'll keep
for
going
three
then.
months.
Jacob Stallings, Tar Heel.
One time target.
Tucker Barnhart, Jan Gomes, Yasmani Grandal, Hedges, Martin Maldonado, who you have a better chance of getting a hit in a major league game. James McCann, Narvaez, Nito, Darno, and some. I mean, Max Stassi. Some of these guys. Like
Yep.
you can find a guy for $2 million in that group.
Yep.
Whether
I agree.
look at kind of the Kevin Plawecki move from a few years ago. That's all you
Yep.
need, and that's what they're going to do. Bold predictions, which kind of carried the day at the early part yesterday before the news. Ref Snyder comes back. We expected, and Pivetta gets the qualifying offer. We'll go through a few of these quickly here. The most expensive free agent the Red Sox will sign this year. I have Teoscar Hernandez. You have Tanner Scott. Chris Smith has Tanner Scott. I think both of those guys should completely be in play. And very obviously, the Pivetta news does not move the needle on either of those. Just we've covered Tanner Scott, but what are your thoughts on Teoscar Hernandez, especially with the QO attached?
Yeah. I mean, he's a good enough player and run producer that I don't think the draft pick compensation should deter you if you really identify him. But if you're going to go after him, then you have to do so knowing that, this is going to be a multi-year deal and it's probably going to be an AAV greater than 20 million. So
Mm-hmm.
unless you're ready
Three for
to,
75, three
yeah,
for 68, something
right,
like that.
right. Unless you're willing to, you go in knowing that that's the bar and that, I'm not sure what the Dodgers do there. They liked having him. They gave him the QO, which means they'd be fine bringing him back. I mean, he'd come back on a QO for about the same amount that he played
Yep.
last year, and they would love that because it limits their liability for a guy in his early to mid 30s. The Dodgers obviously have the capital and the resources to spend that for 1 year. But to get him on a multi-year deal, it's going to take in excess of 20 million per and at least 3 years. We know that he likes it here. We don't know what winning a World Series means to all of this free agency. Does it further whet his appetite to go to a team that he thinks has a real chance of winning right away? Does he say, I had the greatest experience ever winning a World Series as a Dodger and the atmosphere in LA. I want to go back. Or does he say, okay, I got my ring. Now I'm going to get my money. And while the Red Sox aren't ready to win it all in 25, they're at least moving in the right direction. We know that he loves Fenway, that it's a good environment. He enjoys playing there. It's a good ballpark for him offensively. Um, given that they have some other significant needs, back end of the bullpen, a number one starter, I question whether they are willing to commit that much money for a veteran outfielder, but they do need a righty bat. And it would seem that that's not going to be Tyler O'Neill. The easiest path there would have been giving him the qualifying offer, where on a 1 year deal, you're not as worried about his long-term injury risk, a guy who has not been able to stay on the field. If you only have him for a year and he only plays 125 games, it's not a great loss. If you commit 3 years and he plays under 100 in two of those, you've been taken.
Boston's opening day rotation will consist of, we wrote these yesterday morning, and now we're probably all wrong if Pivetta comes back. I had Crochet, Houck, Jack Flaherty, Bayo, and Giolito. You had Crochet, Houck, Crawford, Bayo, and Giolito. How would you project it now, 1 day later? I would throw Pivetta in there and get rid of Jack Flaherty, I guess, if I had to redo it, just
Yeah, I
based
mean,
on
I
the
still
development.
think and would hope that they're going to aim to get a legitimate number one or a guy who can be a number one. Crochet hasn't done it, but he's kind of that guy that everyone expects to be it now that he's a full-time starter and has made that transition and is healthy again. It obviously is going to take a lot to get him from the White Sox. You would have 3 years of control of him. That's significant. You wouldn't feel the pressure to extend him right away, although that would probably be a good idea. But even if they did it without any thought of extending him, getting a pitcher in his prime for 3 years is pretty
Two,
valuable.
2 years.
Just 2 years of control. Sorry.
Yeah. So you'd probably want to extend him,
Yeah, on
pretty soon.
two, that would be more of a a thought, part of that thought process.
Chris Smith has Brian Wu from the Mariners as his target. Dipoto said they don't want to trade any of the starters. I do find that hard to believe, considering number one, they should. Number two, he loves making trades. So Smith starting five, Houck, Bayo, Crawford, Giolito, and Wu. The most significant trade addition Breslow will make. I have Crochet. You have Crochet. Smith has Wu. And then the next one, the best prospect or player the Red Sox trade. Smitty has Casas as you do, and I have Wilyer Abreu and Cutter Crawford. I feel better about this one, like I said, in the wake of the Pivetta news, because it makes Crawford a little bit more expendable. To me, you move from Abreu, you move from Crawford, and you move another, pretty good prospect in that mid range, maybe in your 6 to 10 range, and you might have enough there. Teams like Major League ready players, right? There's certainty in Wilyer Abreu. There's certainty in Cutter Crawford. That fills two giant needs for the White Sox. You have Casas going out in this move.
Yeah, I think it's going to take an elite young player to get a guy like Crochet back. You can throw
Do you
in
consider Abreu in that range or no?
not quite yet because he hasn't demonstrated that he can hit lefties.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, he's a plus right fielder who crushes right-handed pitching, but hasn't shown he can do it. He's essentially a platoon guy.
Yep.
And I think you need somebody bigger headlining that deal. I think Casas is a guy that could do that and package him with another young pitcher that they would get in return to help replace Crochet in their rotation. The White Sox are obviously, with 122 losses, they have a deep hole out of which to dig, and it's not going to be expected that they come anywhere close to contention the next couple of years. This is long term, so you probably have to give them an arm. Maybe it's Crawford. I think someone like Crawford, because of his relative affordability, what's his ARB number? 4.5, something like that.
Something like that.
That's a lot easier. People thought, well, maybe they're okay with Pivetta coming back because they can trade him. Somebody like Crawford might have a higher value as a trade piece because there are additional years of control and much less money. You trade for Pivetta after he accepts the QO. You only have 1 year of control and you have a $21 million salary. Now, given that we're hearing teams are willing to pay him that over multiple years, that might not be enough off-putting to teams, but you only have 1 year of control. Whereas with Crawford, you'd have 3 or 4.
Number 5, and this is where we'll cut it for bold predictions. Coming out of spring training, the Red Sox closer will be Chris and I have Slayton. You have Tanner Scott. I have Slayton, even though I think that they might sign Tanner Scott. No matter what, it seems like that high octane bullpen arm, whether Tanner Scott, Jeff Hoffman, pick your poison, is probably going to be an addition to this team in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and look, Tanner Scott, I said that he would be their most expensive free agent, and people kind of push back on that. Like, that's the biggest guy. Guess what?
Like
Tanner
million.
Scott's, huh?
Gonna get like 70 million.
Oh, he's going to get much more than that. I mean, right. If Hader got 95 over 5, I think Scott's going to come close to that, if not top it. Same guy, lefty power arm.
MLB trade rumors. Let's see. 4 for 56. I do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I think that's wishful thinking. I think he's going to get a lot more than, what's that? 14 million a year.
Yeah,
I think the number gets much closer to 20. He's the premier reliever out there. He's left-handed. That's an additional thing that could boost his value. I don't know if he's going to match Hader at 5 times 19, but I think he's going to come close.
I want to end with this. This was something I think I teased at some point. Yeah, in the bold predictions, but I wanted to kind of talk about it because it was on my radar and something I was thinking about at 4 a.m. the other night, which is another indictment on kind of our life and our work-life balance. I don't know the innate needs and wants of the Arizona Diamondbacks. I do know that they no longer want Jordan Montgomery on their team, and that Jordan Montgomery most likely hates their owner for saying he was a disaster. So how about this? And I don't know if they want this guy, but let's just say they do. Jordan Montgomery for Masataka Yoshida. Who says no?
I don't see the Diamondbacks taking on another 3 years of Yoshida, given his production. And I think that even coming off a disappointing season, which Montgomery certainly had, I think they they would get a higher return than that. I'm not sure. I mean, look, Yoshida's coming off shoulder surgery.
It's
The
22 and a half
expectation,
for next year after a terrible year.
Montgomery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what is attractive to them about, if you're looking at bad contracts, you kind of have to match them up, right? And there's a lot more left on Yoshida than on Montgomery. And Yoshida is a very limited player right now. He can't run, he has no power. And at least to start the year, he's incapable of playing the outfield. And when he does, he's not very good. So he is a bat to ball guy who beats up right handed pitching from the left side. Not a lot of power, no athleticism, no base running ability, not a good outfielder, and a bum surgically repaired shoulder with 50 something million dollars left. Not a big line for that.
Sean McAdam, not Masataka Yoshida's agent.
Not at all.
That's the Fenway Rundown for today. We'll have one more this week. Guest possible. We'll announce that, of course, first and foremost on the Fenway Rundown Insider Text Program.
Which you can be among the first to find out if you text the word join to the following number, 617-751-6257. Click the link to subscribe. It's free for your first 2-week trial period where you get to get all the latest Red Sox news as it happens. That's important in these days of the offseason where transactions and signings and trades happen all the time. You'll be the first to know about them. After that 14-day trial period, it'll be a $4.99 charge monthly.